Welcome back, Canonites. The second flight for Halo Infinite has come and gone, and unlike the first flight, I was actually able to do something more than just weapon drills this time. Playing Halo Infinite was an overall blast and a memorable experience. I had fun in the few streams I was able to host, playing with friends and people from the community, and generally came away with a positive impression of the game. But now that our taste of the game is over, it's time to give some feedback. And so, as is demanded by YouTube law, these are my thoughts on Halo Infinite. And just to note, this is an almost purely feedback video. I'm not here to talk about bugs and the like, but to provide commentary and criticism on the game itself. With that understood, let's dive in. Guns, guns, and more guns. At the core of a game like Halo are its guns, its weapon sandbox, making the weaponry of Halo Infinite the perfect place to begin. Overall, I find Infinite's gunplay pretty solid. The guns look and sound great, and they're satisfying to wield and shoot for the most part. Above all, it really feels like 343 have actually taken a step back from the monumental weapons sandbox Halo had developed by the time of Halo 5, and simply asked, what role does each gun play? With Infinite, we can see a very clear reduction in the number of weapons in the game, something that really hasn't been done before when it comes to Halo sequels, along with the introduction of several new weapons. And of those weapons that remain, new and old, each feels like it's filling a unique role within the sandbox, or stands out in some way. The Cindershot and Shock Rifle aren't simply the Forerunner and Brute precision weapons, they deal unique damage and have unique styles of play, more so than previous alien precision weapons like the Light Rifle or Carbine. Much as I might miss certain guns, I gotta give 343 credit with how they've handled the weapon offering for launch. An interesting feature introduced with Halo 5 returns for Infinite, that being Smart Scope, or at least the ability for all weapons to essentially zoom in was carried over. Unlike Halo 5, this new zoom on non-scoped weapons doesn't provide any gameplay benefit other than the magnification effect, which I'm honestly fine with. The feature feels useful, but not necessarily overpowered. The one issue I have with this new Smart Scope, however, for lack of a better word, is that players being shot at will not descope or be forcibly zoomed out, which does still happen on scoped weapons. Being shot at should descope a player, period, regardless of whether they're wielding scoped weapons or not. Now then, let's get into some specifics. We'll touch on each weapon that was accessible during the flight, officially or otherwise. Starting with the MK50 Sidekick, this pistol feels like the perfect marriage between Halo 5's and Halo 2's respective magnums. At 7 shots to kill, the pistol can be extremely deadly in precise hands, however it is almost always better suited as a backup, much more in line with the expectations for a sidearm. And seemingly to avoid a repeat of Halo 5, the Sidekick gets noticeably less effective at longer ranges. Part of this loss in effectiveness is actually due to bloom, something I'm not sure how I feel about. Had no one told me that the Sidekick had bloom, I might not have noticed. To me, that seems to say that the use of bloom in this instance is warranted to some degree. I know just how poor Bloom's reputation within the community is, a more than earned reputation I might add, but the Sidekick felt generally good to use, and I can't say I had any issues with the design either. Next up is the MA40 Assault Rifle, and here, let's start with the design. I was always a fan of the MA37 design for Reach, and while I certainly don't dislike the MA40, I will miss the MA5D. The return to the old Reach design feels really odd, and the rifle feels kind of out of place due to its association with the aforementioned prequel. What's weirder still is that the lore establishes the gun as a newer model, which just makes it feel all the odder, at least to me. The gun just sticks out like a sore thumb. Which isn't to say that its inclusion ruins the game or anything, it's a detailed nitpick, but a nitpick. Now, in terms of function, I absolutely adore this rifle. The assault rifle has really been allowed to flourish under 343, and I'm glad to see that continue. That said, I wouldn't mind a minor nerf, specifically to reduce its effectiveness at long range, and my suggested method would be to increase the rate of bloom on the gun. This way the AR doesn't have to suffer a reduction of damage, and it would actually reward players who burst fire the weapon. Something like that, I feel, would benefit the larger meta without nerfing the AR into oblivion. Autos should be effective, damn it. After that, we have the BR-75 Battle Rifle, the latest addition to the BR line. I don't have a whole lot to say on this subject, honestly. The BR felt great to use. If I had one criticism, it's only that I wish the BR-75 were more of a middle ground between the BR-55 and the BR-85, but I don't really care all that much. The BR looks great and feels great. Following that is the VK-78 Commando, another new addition to the franchise, one with an interesting tie to the deeper lore of Halo and the game's first precision automatic. Design-wise, I wasn't a huge fan early on, but the gun has grown on me. Performance-wise, however, it's hard for me to judge. If you followed me on Twitter at all, you might have heard about my aiming difficulties during the flight. The Commando was one of the guns where this issue was most prevalent for me. We'll talk more about this subject later on in the video though, as right now we're just discussing the guns themselves. I will say in terms of power, the Commando felt just right when I used it against static targets. Next up we have the CQS-48 Bulldog, the shotgun for Halo Infinite, and man am I in love with this gun. The design was already great in my book, but the function is just so much fun. This shotgun is notably weaker than the traditional M45 or M90, but the increased rate of fire and range more than make up for it in my opinion. The gun feels powerful but not overpowered, and getting kills with it felt incredibly rewarding, which is what you really want from a gun at the end of the day, isn't it? After that we have the new MLRS-2 Hydra. In terms of gameplay, it is a ton of fun. The Hydra features two firing modes, one which will simply fire a missile in the direction one is aiming, and the second mode will activate target tracking. The tracking is pretty solid, not too overpowered and not too weak, and the missiles themselves are effective enough. But as might become common, my main issue with the gun is its design. The Halo 5 Hydra had a fairly unique profile that couldn't easily be mistaken for anything else. And if the profile wasn't enough to give the gun away, its design and color scheme would help. With Halo Infinite, however, the Hydra's profile has been oversimplified, making the gun easily mistakable for something like the MA-40 in the right situation. It doesn't stand out anymore in silhouette or design. It's a boringly geometric shape with a boring gray paint job. Nothing about it stands out, and that's honestly extremely depressing, as I felt the Hydra was one of the better designs 343 produced. Our penultimate human weapon is the M41 SPNKr, aka the rocket launcher. Returning to its classic design after the poor reception of the M57 Pilum, a grossly underrated design in my book, there's little to say about the rocket launcher itself. The design is iconic, and the weapon is as deadly as it has ever been. Closing out the human weapons is the sniper rifle. This is another weapon I had a hard time using, experiencing the same aiming issues I had with the Commando. Aim issues aside, however, the S7 sniper is what you'd expect it to be, and I personally like how the design seems to mix aspects of older sniper rifles with 343's newer designs. Moving over to banished weaponry, next up is the plasma pistol, and boy is that a subject to discuss. First, as I have said before, I love that the Halo 5 Sangheili-inspired design is back. I wasn't the biggest fan of it initially, but it's grown on me over the years. Functionality-wise, however, the plasma pistol leaves a lot to be desired. At 17 regular shots or 3 overcharged shots to kill, the plasma pistol isn't all that far off from its Halo CE counterpart, requiring only 2 additional plasma bolts to kill. However, after Halo's Reach 4 and 5 gave us such effective plasma pistols, the return to something older is just discouraging me from using the gun in matchmaking. Which isn't to say I used it excessively in previous games, but I feel like there's a lot less reason to pick up the gun now. Only adding to all this is the fact that the plasma pistol, again like Halo CE, no longer EMPs vehicles. It'll strip away shields from Spartans no problem, but the vehicle EMP is gone now. I will note that some players reported seeing AI enemies EMP vehicles with the weapon, so it's possible that the lacking EMP is just a bug, but it could easily be the other way around. And given the introduction of damage types and the new electric weaponry, I think it's pretty likely that the plasma pistol EMP is gone. Seeming to want each damage type to have consistent properties, and likely to make the electro pistol more appealing and unique, 343 decided to strip the plasma pistol of its vehicle disabling abilities. And honestly, I think that would be fine if the plasma pistol itself were effective in its own right. But between its weak shots, the lack of vehicle EMPing, and the weak tracking on overcharged shots, there's just not much reason that I can see to go take this gun off the rack. I hope it can be buffed for the final game. After that, let's jump over and discuss the Needler. In terms of function, it's fine. The gun is thoroughly satisfying to use, the needle tracking is just right, and if I had to change one thing about its function, I might suggest ever so slightly reducing the number of needles to cause a super Combine explosion. Things are a different story when it comes to sound and visual effects though. Sound design has definitely improved since the last flight, though the gun generally still sounds on the quiet side. Most of all, the Super Combine explosion remains rather subdued and unimpressive. The sound of the explosion and the explosion effect should both receive a boost in my opinion. They should be loud, literally and figuratively, and bombastic. When you Super Combine an enemy, it should be an amazingly satisfying moment, something it currently isn't in my experience. Next up we have the Pulse Carbine, a weapon that I have a lot to say about. Starting with its functionality, the gun just doesn't really feel satisfying to use. Its 3-round burst works well enough against static targets, but in a match, the burst fire and weak tracking on the plasma bolts feel like more of a hindrance than anything. I feel like I have no control over where my shots are going, which is discouraging me from using the Pulse Carbine at all. Maybe making it an automatic would be better, I don't know. The gun just does not feel useful to me at all. In terms of design, the Pulse Carbine feels like a huge missed opportunity. To start, the gun looks far too much like the Storm Rifle or Covenant Carbine at a glance, with little of its own unique design elements to stand out. Granted, with both of those weapons absent from Infinite, that's not much of an issue. No other gun in the game currently has the Pulse Carbine's look. That said, with Infinite bringing back Reach's AR, and with how much Infinite incorporates overheating mechanics for plasma weaponry, this could have been a perfect opportunity to bring back the plasma repeater design. I know this gun doesn't get much love in the community, but its gameplay aside, how can you dislike that design? It's practically purpose-built for Infinite's sandbox already, a few tweaks and it could be a great returning weapon. But it's not like the gun can change at this point, at least not visually. I just hope 343 are able to refine the gun's gameplay a little more before launch. After that we have the Ravager, another 3-round burst weapon, though one with much more going on. I'll admit I wasn't into the design all that much when I first saw it, and the giant-ass blade it sports still looks silly to me, but what the Ravager lacks in form, it more than makes up for in functionality. The 3-round bursts of the Ravager travel along a predictable arc, making aiming at distances rather simple once one gets the hang of it. The Ravager is also yet another gun to feature an alternate firing mode. If the player holds the trigger, the gun will charge a shot, kind of like the plasma pistol. When it's released, the resulting shot will cover an area with burning plasma. I love this feature and the visuals that accompany it. I know more than a few people have criticized the fire effect for the Ravager, but I love it. It reminds me of the infusion effect from Halo Wars 2. This isn't meant to be fire, it's a burning plasma effect. Replacing it with simple fire would be boring, in my opinion. The Mangler may be my favorite new addition to Halo Infinite. Very reminiscent of Halo 3's Mangler, the Mangler fires powerful individual spikes one at a time, resulting in what is essentially a brute revolver. And I am a sucker for revolvers. There's a big reason I played as a hunter back in my Destiny days, loved me that golden gun, but I digress. In addition to a sick design, the Mangler is essentially the Halo CE pistol with a new skin, the gun only requiring 3 headshots to kill a Spartan. The projectiles also have a predictable falling arc as they travel, adding yet another layer of skill to the weapon. And to ensure the gun didn't dominate too much, it has a static rate of fire. The Mangler is an absolutely fantastic weapon. Next up we have our first electro weapon, the Disruptor. With the introduction of damage types for Halo Infinite, 343 seemingly wanted consistent properties for each damage type. To make electric weapons stand out, and perhaps to entice players to use them, the ability to EMP vehicles was added to the electro weapon offering. And this is probably what we should talk about here. With the Spartan laser seemingly nowhere in sight at the moment, there is a hope for a resurgence of vehicle combat in Halo, the likes of which hasn't been seen arguably since Halo 2. However, I have seen concerns that the electric weapons are basically having the same result as the Spartan laser, suppressing vehicle combat by making it too easy to counter vehicles and destroy them. I can't say that was my experience during the flight, but I can definitely understand the concern. Hopefully 343 can find an ideal balance. As for the Disruptor itself, in the few bot matches I tried with the weapon, it felt fun to shoot and use and felt plenty effective. The Shock Rifle, on the other hand, left me wanting. I love the idea of this weapon, I love the design, but the firing felt rather inconsistent. The gun should take 2 shots to kill a fully shielded enemy, though it can actually kill in 1 shot, or 1 5-round burst specifically, if all 5 shots of that burst are headshots. I am not a big fan of this, honestly. I never thought of the shock rifle as a sniping weapon, more of a marksman weapon. Being able to kill in just 1 shot while rewarding for skilled players feels like it would simply discourage more casual players. Getting killed by the shock rifle from across the map doesn't feel the same as being sniped. It feels like you were cheated, at least to me. I know I'm not describing this the best way, but I feel like something needs to change with the rifle. I love rewarding skill, but this gun feels like it takes it a bit too far, especially given the problem with aiming reliably that I've brought up a few times now, and which we'll address very soon. Next up we have the Skewer, the banished heavy weapon. Almost a mix between a rocket launcher and a sniper rifle, the Skewer can be scoped in twice for extreme accuracy at long range. I still found it very difficult to aim properly, but again, we'll cover that later. As for the gun itself, the design, the audio, the animations, the kick when firing, all of that felt great. Diving into the melee weapons a bit, let's talk about the energy sword. The design looks great, and the gameplay is pretty much what you'd expect at this point. I never did think to test whether the sword could scope in and if that increased its melee range, but I'm doubting at least the second of those features is going to carry over. What I can say about the sword though is that it was fun to use for the brief time I had it. Closing out the banished weaponry, we have the gravity hammer. Overall, I really enjoy the new way it plays. The longer swing makes the weapon a little more risky, but the payoff is a larger area of effect. As I said on my video on the previous flight's outcomes report, this lets the gravity hammer feel more unique in comparison to the energy sword, at least in my experience so far. I will note that the lack of physics effects on the hammer, and the grenades for that matter, are disappointing. We know, thanks to custom game settings, that the classic physics effects of weapons like the gravity hammer and grenades can be enabled to certain degrees, so surely we can get the proper physics effects back on these weapons by launch. Finally, we come to the Forerunner weapons, starting with the Heatwave. Initially, I was not a fan of the Heatwave's gameplay. I found it incredibly weak and not very useful. Strangely, however, I was suddenly finding myself enjoying the gun during BTB. Nothing obviously changed, but something with BTB just made the gun a lot more fun to wield. That said, I still have my criticisms of it. First, I'm not really sure what the point of the bouncing projectiles is other than to be a callback to the Scattershot. They don't seem to have very strong tracking behavior, at least not like we saw during the multiplayer preview trailer. Once they hit their target, if they hit a target, they just scatter to the winds. I'd say either get rid of the bouncing projectiles or give them stronger target tracking capability in some form. Right now, they just seem entirely pointless. And as we've already discussed elsewhere, I simply do not care for the gun's design. It looks like something humans would produce after reverse engineering a Forerunner gun, not something the Forerunners developed themselves. As I've said before, I hope that future Forerunner guns can be allowed more freedom of design. Next up we have the Cindershot, the Forerunner rifle for this game. In terms of design, the gun is a step up from the Heatwave with a much more unique look. However, it still ends up looking like a giant gray blob, with little to make its parts stand out from one another. Worse, it retains a very human-like stock for the gun. I want Forerunner weapons to look alien, not like something humans could or would produce, and a lot of Halo Infinite's Forerunner armory feels like it could be human. Funny enough, there actually is an orange line running along the bottom of the gun at the moment. I would love to see more of these Forerunner lines, for lack of a better description, on some of these guns. Even just 1 or 2 to make them stand out more from UNSC weaponry. In terms of function, I'm not exactly sure how I feel about the Cindershot. The gun fires arcing bolts of hard light which explode after bouncing or upon hitting an enemy. Basically, it's a partial remake of the Pro Pipe from Halo Reach with a little bit of Brute Shot from Halo 2. 2 bolts are enough from the gun to kill and disintegrate an enemy, which might be a little too powerful. During the bot match I played, people were dying incredibly fast and often. Granted, the weapon isn't designed to be one player's spawn with right off the bat, and its high lethality might make it more balanced in arena or BTB settings. One thing I do like about the new Forerunner weapons, however, is their reload. When a weapon is empty, the gun seems to basically suck in energy from its surroundings or from an internal battery of some kind. It's really cool and a welcome change to these guns as far as I'm concerned. Still though, their designs leave a bit to be desired. Finally, we have the Sentinel Beam, which is probably my favorite Forerunner gun so far. It looks and feels alien, the geometry of the gun itself stands out, and there is visible lighting on the gun. It's basically what I want from a Forerunner weapon at minimum. 343, if and when you're looking to add new Forerunner weapons to the game, the Sentinel Beam should be your main inspiration. Functionally, the gun is a lot of fun, though suffers from the aiming issues I've been bringing up so far. So overall, those are my thoughts on the weapons individually. As a whole, the sandbox feels much more refined than it's been in a while, with much more thought put into how each weapon plays both individually and as part of the larger offering. Improvements can still be made, but it's a great starting point. And briefly regarding grenades, I don't have much to say on them individually. I love that the spike grenade is far deadlier than its Halo 3 version, and the dynamo grenade is just fun to use. Not much else to say, other than what's already been said. I do have to comment a moment though on aiming in this game. As I've noted a few times, I had serious trouble aiming in the game, more so than I've had with any other Halo game or any shooter across PC and console. I played with different Xbox controllers and mouse and keyboard. While I can make improvements with Halo Infinite's swath of customization options for each input, I could never find settings that felt comfortable, or at least didn't result in me feeling like I was fighting the game just to aim. When moving a gun's reticule where I wanted it to be, it felt far too easy to move right past my target. I don't know if the issue is one concerning aim assist, if aim acceleration is just too fast or something, or what. I don't know why I had such trouble with aiming in this game, but I do know that I'm not alone. Several threads on Reddit and posts on Twitter showed that issues were not some fluke, but affecting a lot of people. Stranger still, the stories of aiming issues would often conflict, so I have no idea how to give proper feedback on this issue other than I want to report my experiences. I worry if the aiming troubles are as common as they appear to be, the game will not succeed. People talk all the time about what Halo needs to succeed, but before any features or game modes or anything, the fundamentals need to be there. The game's core needs to be fun and engaging right off the bat. Halo Infinite is damn close, but if people are encountering the aiming issues I and others had, I can see those people dropping the game pretty quickly. Yes, there are ways to improve your skill and get better, but if a game isn't fun from the start, I can't imagine people will stick around to get better, instead just choosing a game that's fun to jump right into. Maybe my concerns are unfounded, but I had to at least get my thoughts on the matter out there. I am curious how others felt on this topic, so let me know if you had issues aiming in this game in the comments below. From there though, let's dive into Academy. Flight 1 gave us an opportunity to try out weapon drills, while this recent flight expanded the offering and opened up access to Training Mode, a new mode where players can practice on Halo maps with customizable loadouts and bots. Weapon drills this time were a marked improvement over the last flight, with many drills feeling more tuned for each weapon individually. Previously, it felt like there was little difference between many of the drills. As many have said, I'd love to see untimed weapon drills, and I'd personally love a version where you can have a number of weapons to choose from right on the weapon bench, or maybe you can pull them out of the gun rack device, and just shoot whatever gun you want for as long as you want. I hope that my idea gets across. I'm not too sure if I was descriptive there enough. Another feature I'd love though is to have enemies shoot back at you as one of the levels for weapon drills. I don't know how best to make that work, but I feel like it could be a valuable option to have. Otherwise, I generally like weapon drills as they are. Training mode is something I've wanted in Halo for years, and I'm so happy it's finally here. Training mode allows players to set up matches on multiplayer maps against bots of varying difficulty, a true tailored and customized experience. Now players can explore and get to know maps on their own terms, people can just engage in bot matches without commitment if they want a more chill experience, and I'm sure people will discover new ways to use the mode as time goes on. There are certainly other things I'd like to see, additional options such as the ability to alter loadouts for bots, but it's in a great place for launch so far. Next up, let's talk Arena. This flight brought back the maps Bazaar, Recharge, and Livefire, and introduced a fourth which we'll talk about in a sec. For Bazaar and Livefire, I don't have much to say. Both maps were incredibly fun to play on and had very solid design in my opinion. I also love many of the Easter eggs on the map, which we'll talk about in a different video. Recharge is a great map too, though if I had one issue, it would be the lack of an interactive element on the map. Recharge seems like it would be the perfect place for an electric trap like the Halo 4 map Vortex. I don't know if that can be added before launch, but I would love to see something like that if possible. In my mind, when the trap is activated, the recharge deck would become electrified, but the rising and sinking stacks would be safe to traverse. I feel like that could work out pretty well, or maybe have the deck flow with electricity now and then at predictable intervals. Whatever the case, I would just love to see more interactive elements on Halo's maps. I loved their resurgence in H2A and would love to see more of that. The fourth map added to this flight was Behemoth, a 4v4 map that brought vehicles back to Arena. Behemoth looks like it could have been lifted straight out of Halo 3, and it's easily my favorite Arena map so far. It feels damn good to run around in 4v4 with vehicles available, and I feel the map could easily support a full 8v8 match without issue. It feels damn good to see the return of mid-sized maps like this that combine the best elements of Arena and BTB for the ultimate Halo experience. Speaking of BTB, let's talk about fragmentation and the new BTB 2.0. Once again, I'm overall on board with the new experience. Fragmentation is huge and open, while providing plenty of cover to make traversing the map less of a risk than something like Blood Gulch or Standoff. It's what I would want from a traditional BTB map, and more. In addition to normal BTB features, Halo Infinite has introduced a couple new ideas to enhance and add to the BTB experience. First up is loot caves, for lack of a better word. Essentially, players can find and guard these locked doors with their AI hacking them. When the door is unlocked, the players are gifted with additional arms and equipment. Soon after, the doors relock, eventually available to be hacked once more. I don't know if this will be present in all BTB maps, but I certainly hope it is. The first time I found one and opened it was incredibly rewarding. I'd love if more powerful weapon variants could be hidden away in there in the future. That could be a very fun way to introduce some crazier weapons like Halo 5 did with Warzone. In general, I love the way BTB works in Infinite. Fighting to secure a newly dropped vehicle or a fresh weapon drop is a ton of fun. However, there were some issues I noticed while playing. Mostly during my play sessions, it was incredibly rare for anything other than Warthogs and Ghosts to drop in, leading to major stagnation in each match. My excitement for Pelican drops decreased match by match as the same item came up over and over with little variety. At least with classic BTB, players knew exactly what vehicles were available and where to find them. Currently in BTB, a mode meant to highlight the game's overall sandbox and vehicle combat in particular, vehicle combat feels rather boring. For the final game, the variety of vehicles needs to change, and heavy vehicles like Scorpions and Wraiths need to appear more frequently. These shouldn't just be endgame items that appear in the last 5 minutes of a match, if you're lucky. I was so excited to finally try out Halo Infinite Scorpion, or Banshee, or Wasp, and never got the chance during the more than 12 hours I played, and I know I'm not alone. This shouldn't happen. The frequency of heavy vehicle drops needs to be increased, or the way vehicle drops are done needs to change. At the moment, BTB isn't living up to its full potential. Another new addition is the inclusion of drop pods, which will deliver new weapons to the battlefield at regular intervals. The weapons seem to be random, and while I don't have an issue with that myself, I did find it a little annoying that you have to walk up to a weapon pod for it to open and reveal the weapon it holds. The pods should just open after impact regardless of player presence. Also, whenever they came in, I heard what sounded like air vehicles overhead but never saw anything. This is minor, but it would be nice if there were long swords or something flying overhead. Or maybe there are and I just missed that, I don't know. Beyond secret caves and vehicle drops, Infinite BTB also seems to mix up gameplay on a game type level. What I mean by this is that in CTF, the location of the flag will change as the match goes on, starting outside the base then moving to different, though predictable locations after each capture, eventually landing at atop the main base. There's also a damn cool feature where the towers shoot off energy beams when one team scores. Swinging over to starting weapons, I felt like the AR and pistol starts worked out surprisingly well. That said, I think part of why it worked was because of how easy it was to find precision weapons on the map. Maybe, especially if 343 can fit in one more flight before launch, they could experiment with precision starts, either the BR or the Commando or something. Finally, let's talk about fusion coils. A huge moment of the July 2020 demo for Infinite was the moment Master Chief picked up and threw a fusion coil. Fans were excited, and with the new BTB we finally got to experience that new mechanic. I absolutely loved throwing fusion coils, and getting kills with them was incredibly satisfying. One thing I would like to see though is more of these on arena maps. This fun new mechanic should not be BTB only, and it's not like fusion coils haven't been on smaller maps before. Moving on to vehicles, as I didn't get to experience everything, we'll just touch on the two that I did get to try, the Ghost and the Warthog. The Banished Ghost is an absolute blast to use. It felt very weighted compared to previous Ghosts, which is what I would expect from a Banished vehicle in general. The boosting is smooth, the handling is fun, and the plasma cannons are fun to shoot. It's everything I would want from a Banished Ghost. And I felt pretty much the same about the Warthog. I'll miss the bars on the vehicle's chassis, but the new Warthog's look is overall solid. It's a blast to drive, featuring the same wonky physics we've grown to love, plus some of the handling improvements 343 made over the years. To my shock and delight, the overheat on the Warthog's turret has also been removed, only further endearing me to this vehicle. Overall, I'm in love with where it's at the moment. Next, let's talk equipment. A returning staple from the days of Halo 3, equipment in Halo Infinite is far more than just another tool in your pocket. While Halo 3 equipment was generally geared towards a more deploy and forget usage, mostly used defensively, Halo Infinite equipment can be used in a more proactive manner, leading to more gameplay usages than anything we'd previously had. The grapple hook and repulsor are probably my favorite two pieces of equipment, as you could theoretically craft entire games around these mechanics. Using the repulsor to send a rocket back or deflect a vehicle will never get tiring. That said, one potential issue with the grapple is how easy it is to grapple jack vehicles. Maybe there should be more to the process, maybe drivers/pilots should have a way to fight back, but the act is ridiculously easy at the moment. The threat sensor is basically a nerfed Promethean vision, and I think it strikes a good balance between giving enemy locations and not being too overpowered. I love the functionality of overshield and active camo in this game. Each take a small window of time to deploy, allowing enemies to put a stop to their use, and ensuring they can't be used in a way that might feel unfair to other players. Thrusters will return from Halo 5 as equipment, something I was very happy to hear. I sadly forgot to capture any footage with it, but I look forward to using it in matchmaking. Finally though, we have the drop wall. As we've discussed, I'm not a big fan of the drop wall's current look. I feel the E3 2018 look was much stronger, and I feel it still takes too long to deploy. 343 have said they want to encourage players to use the drop wall in a more proactive way, but in Slayer matches, I just don't see that happening all that often. Even in matches against bots, the bots would try to deploy drop walls at the last moment to avoid death, just like players do. 343, your own AI are using the equipment defensively just like players. Please reduce the deployment time and accept that players are just going to use the wall defensively. Next up, let's talk briefly about the voices we hear during matchmaking. First, I really like Spartan Agrena, and I am in love with the personal AI. I know a lot of people don't really like how often the AI talk, and I think 343 said they're working on something to help with that, but I'm personally 100% all in for them as they are. Fret has been an absolute doll, and I likely will never get tired of his commentary. More than that though, I look forward to any voices 343 adds in the future. I'd love a Superintendent AI that only makes the sounds the Super made in Halo 3 ODST, or a Jeff Steitzer or Pete Stacker AI, for example. That praise aside, I would like to hear Jeff Steitzer's voice more, especially in BTB. Steitzer seems to be completely absent from BTB, which he absolutely shouldn't be. If nothing else, 343, please make him the voice reading off medals just like in Arena. After that, let's address the new player outlines. Personally, I had no complaints about them. I didn't find much trouble, if any, with discerning allies from enemies, or reacting to enemies, or anything like that. In fact, it's been much easier to spot enemies than in any previous game. Players can't simply hide in the shadow or light, letting their armor disguise them thanks to poor color choices during development. It's lovely, and I'm so glad 343 are changing to outlines instead of red versus blue, or any sort of color versus color setup. I love seeing the variety of armor coatings during a match. That all said, there are a couple things I would like to see changed. First, I'd love if shield color could be separated from armor colors. I'd like to be able to return the classic look of Spartan shields while having the colored outlines. If that can be done before or after launch, that would be appreciated. Wrapping things up, let's tackle customization. While I was initially not a fan of armor coatings, they have grown on me lately, especially after this recent flight. It seems like 343 can get a lot more creative with them, doing far more than would potentially be possible with a traditional customization system. I'd absolutely love to be able to control a lot of these settings myself, but I can't say I am as upset about coatings as I used to be. That said, I'm still not a fan of the armor core system, especially as it's all but officially confirmed that helmets and shoulder pieces won't be usable across armor cores. That especially seems like a major misstep, one I honestly can't comprehend. I've seen some suggest that the helmets and shoulder pieces might not perfectly line up when applied to different armor cores, and if that were the only reason, I still couldn't say that I'd agree that the possibility of armor pieces clipping is a good enough reason to withhold customization options. Whatever the real reason is, I just hope 343 can fix it within the next year. There shouldn't be any reason I can't put the Yoroi helmet on the Mark V body or something. I don't care that they'll mismatch, the option should be there. I'd rather ditch the armor core system altogether personally. I feel like it's a step in the wrong direction, but that's a whole different discussion. Maybe one I'll dive into one day. For now though, there's little of my criticism of the system that can be reasonably addressed. On a more positive note, I absolutely love the prosthesis options for this game. Now, there are certainly other topics I could touch on, but at the moment, this pretty much sums up most of my feelings on the game. Overall, Halo Infinite is looking great. It has a very strong visual design and art direction. It sounds great, sounds are present and heard, loud when needed, soft as necessary, and it's just fun to play. Hopefully 343 can act on some of the feedback here, the feedback from the larger community, before and after launch. I'm definitely looking forward to the next outcomes report. But these are just my experiences and takeaways. Please share yours in the comments below and/or consider joining the conversation over on the Halo Canon Discord. Link for that is in the description box below. Whatever your decision, thank you for watching, stick around for the Patreon shoutout, and look forward to a couple future videos in which we'll be looking at all the lore and Easter eggs from the flight. For now though, this has been Halo Canon. First off, I'd like to give a big thank you to our Harspus patrons. First, there's Hope, then we have Freight, Discombobulated Sycophant, Justin Montgomery, Ada Frame, Man in the Dark, Keisha Dila, Daddy Anarchy, and finally Great Scott Productions. Thank you all for your amazing support of the channel. Next, I'd like to thank our theoretical patrons. If you'd like to see your name here or get a direct shout out, check out patreon.com/HaloCanon. You can simply support the channel or get additional benefits such as behind the scenes materials, including raw audio for upcoming videos, or even shoutouts like this. All patrons now get early access to certain videos as well, and more benefits are to come. However, your continued viewership is more than enough for me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and maybe even subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you really enjoy this, turn on that notification bell so you can be among the first to see new videos when they release. But for all my fellow Canonites, keep on being awesome.